If we were in person or together on Zoom, I would ask you this question. Why use quotations? What value do they have in your papers? And together as a class, we would come up with reasons. Reasons like it shows you understand the material. It shows that you've read the material. It shows that you didn't just make things up. So they have value. This is your evidence, that sense that somebody else said something and it was important to include and you understand it. The thing is, some students will turn in papers that don't have enough quotations in them. And what do I mean by enough? It means they summarize material. They don't ever reference anything specific from it, including quotations. And yes, I have had research papers exactly like that, where a student summarized their own opinion and included citations at the end, but no reference to them in the text. Clearly, that's not enough. But why wouldn't a student use enough quotations? Again, if we were together, I would ask you, and you would come up with reasons. And I hope you're thinking about like why somebody might not use quotations in a text or more than a few. Some of the reasons students have given me before include they didn't read the text, and so they just summarized what was discussed in class. Or they knew that the text had this material, but they couldn't find the right quote. Or even that they weren't sure how to include the quotation. Some students are afraid of plagiarism, and so they avoid it by just putting everything into their own words. At the opposite end of the spectrum, some students use too many quotations. And what do I mean by that? I mean that their text, their paragraphs are more quotations than their own writing. And again, I would ask why. And this time, students have lots of answers. Things like, well, the author said it really well, and they're not sure that they can say it as well. Or they didn't really understand it, and so they just included a lot of it to show that they'd read the material. And then again, it helped them meet a word count, and so they piled on the quotations. And then again, they're afraid of plagiarism. And so they use lots of quotations because they're afraid if they put things in their own words, it will seem like plagiarism. And finally, they're just not sure how to use quotations effectively. And that's it. Most of the time, it comes down to just not being confident about how to use it. And so I want to analyze this quotation. By the way, most of this material is taken from a book called They Say, I Say, The Moves That Matter in Academic Writing by Gerald Graff and Kathy Berkenstein. And they include this example from Susan Bordeaux. Let me read it aloud, and I want you to find what doesn't work in this quotation. Susan Bordeaux writes about women and dieting. Fiji is just one example. Until television was introduced in 1995, the islands had no reported cases of eating disorders. In 1998, 3 years after programs from the United States and Britain began broadcasting there, 62% of the girls surveyed reported dieting. Susan Bordeaux is right. Another point she makes is, and then the essay goes on. And I would ask, why doesn't this work? And students would easily notice that there are only 3 sentences that the student wrote, and then one very long quotation. Yes, there isn't a lot of student writing in this. And other students would say, there's no in-text documentation. You're right, that's missing. Some students would say, who's Susan Bordeaux? And then I would laugh and make a joke like, she could be my neighbor. No, we do need to know who she is. Then we'd start getting to the deeper problems. Susan Bordeaux writes about women and dieting. And then it jumps right into a quotation about Fiji. And it's not clear, how is women and dieting and Fiji related? Because women and dieting is some contextual information, but it's such a broad topic. And then we've got that quotation, Fiji is just one example. And we're wondering, Fiji is just one example of what? And in the end, there's not enough context and there's no analysis. So we don't even know, what is Susan Bordeaux right about? We have no idea. And then finally, one student would say, the author just dropped the quotation into the paragraph and there's no introduction. They've heard that doesn't work, and it doesn't. Sometimes students will say the quotation is too long, and it really is, but mostly it's just not doing anything. We're left wondering, what is this essay about? Who is Susan Bordeaux? What is she writing about? And what does she write about? This is the same quotation. And I want you to notice what makes this one work better. Feminist sociologist Susan Bordeaux deplores Western media's obsession with female thinness and dieting. Her basic complaint is that increasing numbers of women across the globe are being led to see themselves as fat and in need of a diet. And so we've got over 4 lines of context. We know who Susan Bordeaux is, and we know what her text is about. It's about her argument against Western media's obsession with images of women and dieting. We know her argument. Increasing numbers of women across the globe are being led to see themselves as fat and in need of a diet. And so here's this claim. Now, when we come to the quotation, the author sets it up saying, citing the islands of Fiji as a case in point. It's a case that illustrates how women across the globe are being led to see themselves as fat and in need of a diet. So, citing the islands of Fiji as a case in point, Bordeaux notes that until television was introduced in 1995, the islands had no reported cases of eating disorders. In 1998, 3 years after programs from the United States and Britain began broadcasting there, 62% of the girls surveyed reported dieting. Oh, here's an example that illustrates the argument. Now that we know the argument, we can see how it's related. But the author of this one doesn't stop, because then there's some analysis. Bordeaux's point is that the Western cult of dieting is spreading even to remote places across the globe. Ultimately, Bordeaux complains, the culture of dieting will find you, regardless of where you live. This suggests an ominous problem growing across the globe because, and then the author continues. The quote is almost as long as it used to be, but we have context and we have analysis that helps us understand why the author is introducing this quotation and why it matters. The thing we have to remember when we're using quotations is that when we choose a quotation, we lift it out of its context, which can change the meaning or make it hard to understand altogether. And as authors, we can't change what the author means. As writers, we have to respect the context surrounding the quotation because we don't want to misrepresent the original author's ideas. We also have to remember that our audience, our readers, have no idea why we chose that quotation unless we develop the analysis. Or we have no idea why this citation from an author matters or how it connects to our main ideas, unless we develop our analysis and let them know. our quotations do not speak for themselves. We actually have to put some work in. So we need to include some things. We need to provide context for the quotation by presenting a concise summary of what prompted the author to say what he or she said. We also need to introduce the quotation by using a signal verb or by integrating the quotation into the sentence grammatically. And then we have to explain and analyze the quotation and why it matters to our discussion. Let me show you what I mean. Here's a quotation that I am pulling from Hip Hop Planet, and I've color coded it. So context and introduction are together, and then the quotation is in black, and then analysis is in blue. The first thing you'll probably notice is that there is a lot of red and there is a lot of blue. There's not a lot of quotation. I've got to set up the context. In Hip Hop Planet, James McBride sets out to challenge older white readers of National Geographic to pay attention to racism and structural oppression of Black Americans by focusing on hip hop, a musical style loved by young people and almost universally hated by the older generation, particularly in 2007 when this was written. He knows that they view the music and its musicians suspiciously, and so he acknowledges that he viewed it that way too, as music seemingly without melody, sensibility, instruments, verse, or harmony, music with no beginning, end, or middle, music that doesn't even seem to be music. And so we've got all of this context, a very short quotation, and now some analysis. Readers who love hip hop might seem offended by this description, but McBride isn't writing to those readers. He wants to reach a different audience, an audience who assumes that rappers are gangsters who want to shoot police and who do not value women. He knows they don't understand the Black experience. They don't see how the music is dipped in the boiling cauldron of race and class, and they don't recognize how their own racism has contributed to a sense of oppression in the Black community. I'm not using signal verbs here. I'm integrating the quotations into my sentence grammatically. And I'm providing lots of analysis because I want my audience to see why this quotation matters to my argument, while at the same time not misrepresenting what McBride is doing. Let me show you another one. This one is from a student in our class. And again, I've color coded it. You can see the context is in red and the analysis is in blue, and the quotations have no highlighting. Wynne begins his essay by challenging his audience's beliefs concerning literature, canon, and education through an anecdote that demonstrates the extent of white supremacy in academia. Wynne recalls his experience as a PhD student at UC Berkeley when he was told by the English department chair that he couldn't write his dissertation on Vietnamese and Vietnamese American literature if he aspired to teach in a university department. Now it's got a colon, which sets up the quotation. You can't do that, he was told. You won't get a job. Nice context. We know how that quotation fits into the text. Now the author is going to add some analysis. In this first passage, Wynne surprises his audience because they believe a school like Berkeley would never behave like this. He exposes his audience to the racist reality he faced, an uncomfortable reality of which they may be ignorant. As Wynne writes, ignorance of this kind is an expression of privilege for the minority. Now the author has introduced a quotation using a signal verb. an introductory clause that sets up that quotation. And the author follows it up with analysis. In other words, Wynn's primarily white audience are able to be ignorant of such pervasive racism because of their privileged position in the empowered majority, a privilege that Wynn does not share. Wynn is analyzing, or the author is analyzing the quotation, ignorance of this kind is an expression of privilege for the minority. And in this analysis, the author sets up why that quotation is important, why it matters, and how it develops the author of this essay's main points about what Wynn is doing in the text. Several sentences of analysis. And you can see with this color coding that there's sort of a ratio. It isn't always as extreme as these two quotations. However, I want you to note that there's more of the author's writing than of the quotation. So your task in this assignment is to identify one single quotation from your last essay and evaluate the context, the introduction, the analysis that followed that quotation. What worked, what didn't work? I would like you to copy and paste a paragraph into your new document and color code it like I have, and then evaluate it. Do you have enough context? How did you introduce the text? Or did you just drop it in? Did you have sufficient analysis? That's the first part. Now I want you to choose a quotation from Barron and Grimm's article, one that you might use in your essay. Introduce it with context that helps your audience understand the quotation. And then introduce it either by using a signal verb or by integrating it into a sentence grammatically and then analyzing it carefully. If it helps you, color code that one just to make sure that you have a good ratio, more of your writing than of the quotation. Graff and Birkenstein provide templates for introducing quotations. And I thought I'd include them here because they can be very valuable. They also have some templates for explaining or analyzing quotations. Basically, X is saying, and then you get to put it into your own words and why it matters. That's how all of these work. I also wanted to provide a list for you of common signal verbs. This is from a writing center in Arizona. And here's some ways that an author might use a signal verb. And here's some common signal verbs. And with that, I will end this recording.